My estranged dad begged to walk me down the aisle after years of neglect, but I refused. Now he's dying and I'm torn between forgiving him or standing my ground. I'm 28F and will be getting married next month. I didn't invite my father to the wedding, but now he's trying to get in touch. I think I need to explain the context, because it all started when I was 6 years old, when my parents got divorced after my dad cheated on my mom with my stepmother. After that, I spent most of my time with my mom, but during holidays and vacations, I stayed with my dad. When I was 8, my half-brother Jake, 20M, was born, and whenever I was with my dad, I was forced to take care of him. When I started high school, I had to move in with my dad, because my mom had to move abroad for work. This period was one of the hardest of my life. My stepmother wasn't a bad person. She tried to include me in things, but she was very submissive to my father. As for my dad, he always treated me like an extra in the house, someone who didn't really belong there. I was constantly responsible for taking care of Jake, and whenever he went out, he would only take my stepmother and Jake, never inviting me. One of the most painful experiences happened when I was 14. My dad announced that the whole family was going to Disney for vacation, but the day before the trip, he told me that he wanted it to be a family moment, their first big trip with Jake. So I was left home alone. This had already become a pattern. Trips to the beach, zoos, or other outings always included just my stepmother and Jake while I was left behind. My dad didn't like me going out with friends or inviting them over. He said, "Teenagers together only cause trouble." And because he was controlling, he would call the house phone at random times to check if I was home. He also had a trusted neighbor who would keep an eye on me to make sure I didn't have any visitors. When I turned 16, living with him, the feeling of being an extra only got worse. Everything I had experienced during vacations, the exclusion and sense of abandonment, became part of my daily life. Things came to a head when I turned 18. My dad got a promotion at work and decided to take a family trip to Europe. Since it was my last year of high school, I was excited, thinking I'd finally be included. But then he told me he didn't have enough money for a trip for 4, so it would just be to celebrate Jake's 10th birthday. I had to stay home. That's when I snapped. I told him he was being unfair and that he shouldn't have given me false hope. I explained how I'd felt over the past years, and he called me ungrateful and spoiled, saying that I lived with him rent-free, which was a lie since my mom sent money to support me, and I did all the housework because both he and my stepmother worked late. The argument escalated, and he kicked me out of the house, saying I was no longer part of the family and not even his daughter. He literally threw me out and tossed my things onto the sidewalk. Luckily, a friend lived nearby and I stayed at her place that night. The next day, I went back to see if my dad had calmed down, but I found my things still on the sidewalk, and some even in the trash. My stepmother had kindly saved a few items for me and handed them over. After that, my dad never reached out, except to call and yell at me a month later when my mom stopped sending him money for my expenses. A few months later, I got into an engineering program in another state, where I met my now fiancé, Mark, 29mm. He was a senior, and we soon connected, realizing we had a lot in common. We started dating, graduated, and now work in the same field, though at different companies. A few months ago, Mark proposed, and I happily said yes. I have social media, but I rarely use it. I've had Instagram for about 6 years, but haven't even posted 10 pictures. I think one of my relatives must have told my dad about the wedding, because about a month after I accepted the proposal, he reached out to me through Instagram, saying he was excited to help with the wedding. I was surprised, both that he had messaged me and that he genuinely thought he would walk me down the aisle. I responded, saying he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle because my stepfather would, and that the wedding would be small, just for my close family. After that, I blocked him. After blocking him and inspired by reading Reddit stories, I expected calls, messages, and even letters full of insults like ungrateful or spoiled. However, the only thing I received was a letter delivered by Jake. Yes, we still have contact. In the letter, my father expressed how sorry he was. I won't copy the exact words, but to summarize, he said that after kicking me out, he lived a normal life with my stepmother and Jake. But when he saw pictures of my graduation with my mom and stepfather, he started feeling regret. He wanted to talk to me, but his pride held him back. He only decided to reach out now because he realized that his pride got him nowhere, and that he wanted to fulfill one of the plans he made when I was born, to pay for my wedding and walk me down the aisle. Honestly, I don't know what to do. I've moved on with my life, and his attempt at redemption after so many years feels a bit too convenient. AET for not wanting to include my dad in my wedding despite his apology. Note: my stepfather is an amazing person. He always goes out of his way to include me in everything, and my stepsisters are wonderful as well. When he found out that my father hadn't taken me to Disney, he planned a trip for the next holiday and took me along with my mother and sisters. This and 1,000 other reasons why I want to walk down the aisle with him. Update 1. Alright, I've got an update for everyone. And I want to start by thanking everyone who commented and shared their thoughts. It was really overwhelming to read the different perspectives, and it helped me feel more confident about my decisions. I wasn't expecting so much support, especially from people who have been through similar situations. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in feeling conflicted about all of this. So, I thought after blocking my dad on Instagram and receiving that letter through Jake, that would be the end of it, at least for a while. I figured he'd back off, considering how he had ghosted me for years and only resurfaced when he heard about the wedding. I was prepared to move on, but things got more complicated than I expected. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, and some unexpected twists came up. First off, after I blocked my dad, I didn't hear from him directly again. But a week later, I got a call from my mom, which threw me for a loop because she sounded really annoyed, more than I've heard her in years. Apparently, my dad somehow found her number. Whether he tracked her down through mutual acquaintances or family members, I'm not sure. And he actually had the nerve to call her to discuss the wedding. According to her, the conversation started civilly enough, with him asking how she's been and making small talk. She was suspicious from the get-go because they haven't spoken in years, so she knew something was up. It didn't take long before he started asking her to talk to me and try to get me to reconsider inviting him to the wedding. When she told me this, I was floored. The audacity of this man, who hadn't been a father to me for years, suddenly reaching out to my mom like they were co-parents who had just had a little falling out. Honestly, it made my blood boil. My mom was furious too. She didn't mince words when she told him that I'm an adult and can make my own decisions, and that if he wanted to fix things with me, he should have tried much sooner, not now that I'm getting married. She told him outright that he didn't deserve to be part of my wedding, especially not in a role like walking me down the aisle, when my stepfather has been the one who's truly been there for me. Here's the kicker, though. My dad apparently didn't take this well at all. He accused her of poisoning me against him and keeping me from having a relationship with him. He even claimed that she had brainwashed me into hating him, which is absolutely ridiculous. My mom had always encouraged me to try and maintain some kind of relationship with him, even when I didn't want to. He refused to take any responsibility for the way he treated me growing up, and instead he tried to paint himself as the victim in all this. According to my mom, he kept going on and on about how he's had a change of heart and how he regrets not being there for me. But when she pressed him on why he hadn't reached out sooner, or why he kicked me out in the first place, he deflected and made excuses. He said things like, "I thought she needed space," or "I wasn't in the right place mentally back then." It's like he's rewriting history in his mind, trying to make it seem like he wasn't as terrible as he was. He even brought up the fact that he wanted to pay for my wedding, which honestly feels like a guilt trip more than anything else. It's like he thinks throwing money at the situation will somehow make everything okay. My mom didn't put up with any of this, though. She told him that I've made my choice, and if he really cared about fixing things with me, he wouldn't be trying to manipulate the situation by calling her. She said he needed to respect my decision, especially since he's had years to make amends and chose not to until now. After she hung up on him, she called me to let me know what had happened. I was shocked, to say the least. My dad has never been the kind of person to reflect on his actions, so for him to even claim that he feels regret is strange to me. But at the same time, his behavior, reaching out to my mom, accusing her of poisoning me against him, trying to buy his way into the wedding, proves that he hasn't really changed. It's like he's only interested in being part of my life now that there's something big happening, something that makes him look bad if he's excluded. It gets weirder, though. A few days after that call, Jake came by to drop off another letter. This one wasn't from my dad, though. It was from Jake himself. I wasn't expecting that at all. He basically wrote to tell me that he understands why I'm upset with our dad and that he respects my decision not to invite him to the wedding. But then he dropped a bombshell. Jake said that our dad has been having some serious health issues recently, and that's part of why he's been trying so hard to reconnect with me. Apparently, he was diagnosed with something a few months ago. Jake didn't give specifics, but it sounds like it's serious. And ever since then, he's been trying to make amends with people he's wronged in the past. Now, this is where things get complicated for me emotionally. On the one hand, I still feel angry and hurt by how my dad treated me growing up, and I don't think a late-stage apology can erase all the years of neglect and mistreatment. But on the other hand, knowing that he's sick makes me feel conflicted. Part of me wonders if I should at least hear him out, if only because I don't know how much time he has left. It's a weird feeling, because I've spent so long resenting him, and now I'm being told he might not be around much longer. Mark has been super supportive through all of this. He told me that it's my decision and that whatever I choose, he'll stand by me. He also pointed out that just because my dad is sick, it doesn't mean I owe him forgiveness, especially if he hasn't truly changed. And I agree with that. I just don't want to look back and regret not giving him one final chance to explain himself, especially if he's reaching out because he knows he's running out of time. But then I think about everything he's done, the way he excluded me from his life for years, the way he threw me out like I was nothing. And it's hard to imagine ever fully forgiving him for that. So yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what to do next. I'm leaning toward maintaining my boundaries and not letting him come to the wedding, because that's supposed to be a happy day for me, and I don't want his presence to taint it. But part of me wonders if I should at least meet with him once, just to hear what he has to say before I make my final decision. I don't know. It's a lot to process. I'll update again once I figure out what my next steps are, but for now, I'm just taking things one day at a time. Thanks again for all the support. Update 2. I'm back with what will likely be the final update to this whole saga. I just want to say thank you again for all of your support, advice, and for sharing your own stories. It's been incredibly helpful to read through the comments, and it's comforting to know that so many people understand the complexities of family relationships, especially when they're strained like mine has been. So I'll just jump right in. After my last update, things were still feeling very uncertain for me. I was torn between sticking to my original plan, keeping my father out of the wedding, and possibly meeting up with him for one last conversation, given the new information about his health. I spent days mulling it over, talking it through with Mark, my mom, and even my therapist. Honestly, I was going back and forth a lot, and it was eating me up inside. But here's what happened next. About a week after I received the letter from Jake, I made the decision to at least hear my dad out. I thought that if I didn't give him this one chance, it might weigh on me in the future, especially if something happened to him. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I definitely wasn't going to invite him to the wedding, but I figured that maybe, just maybe, I could get some closure. So I messaged Jake and asked if he could set up a meeting between me and my dad, somewhere neutral. I told Jake I wasn't making any promises, but I'd be open to sitting down and talking things through. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop near my place. I'll admit, the whole day leading up to that meeting, I felt sick with anxiety. I hadn't seen my dad in person for years, and the last time we spoke face-to-face, he was literally throwing my stuff onto the sidewalk and telling me I wasn't part of the family anymore. I didn't know what to expect, but I prepared myself for the worst. When I walked into the coffee shop, I spotted him right away. He looked different. I'm not sure if it was just age or the illness Jake mentioned, but he seemed smaller, thinner, and more tired than I remembered. He stood up when I approached the table, but I didn't hug him or anything. I just sat down across from him and waited for him to speak. The first few minutes were awkward, to say the least. He fumbled for words, and I could tell he was nervous, which was a stark contrast to the confident, controlling person I remembered from my childhood. Finally, he started to apologize. He said he regretted how he treated me, how he'd excluded me from the family, and how he hadn't been there for me when I needed him the most. He admitted that he was selfish, that he prioritized his relationship with Jake and my stepmother over me, and that he had no excuse for the way he acted. But here's the thing. As he spoke, it felt hollow. I don't know if it's because I've spent so many years resenting him, or if it's because his words didn't really line up with his actions, but I didn't feel the relief I thought I might. He said all the right things. He apologized for kicking me out, for the trips I was excluded from, for the way he dismissed me as part of the family. He even teared up a bit when he talked about how much he regrets not seeing me grow up or being there for my milestones, like my graduation. And then he dropped the bomb. He told me that the reason he reached out now, beyond just wanting to make amends, was because his health had taken a serious turn. He had been diagnosed with cancer a few months ago, and while he's undergoing treatment, the prognosis isn't great. He didn't give specifics, but he implied that things weren't looking good for him. He said he didn't want to die with things unresolved between us, and that he wanted to be part of my life again, even if it's only for a little while. I sat there listening to all of this, and I felt conflicted. On one hand, I felt a tiny bit of sympathy for him. No one wants to hear that a parent is dying, no matter how terrible that parent has been. But at the same time, it felt like emotional manipulation. He had years to make things right, and now that his time might be running out, he suddenly wants to play the role of the remorseful father. I just couldn't shake the feeling that if he weren't sick, he wouldn't be sitting across from me, trying to fix things. When he finished talking, he asked if there was any way I would reconsider letting him be part of the wedding. He said he didn't expect to walk me down the aisle, but he just wanted to be there, to see me on my special day. He even offered to help with some of the expenses, which felt like another attempt to buy his way back into my life. I sat in silence for a long time before responding. And then I told him the truth. I told him that while I appreciated his apology, it didn't erase the years of neglect, exclusion, and hurt that he caused me. I told him that I had built a life without him, and that my stepfather has been more of a father to me than he ever was. I told him that I'm happy now, that I've moved on, and that I don't feel comfortable having him at the wedding, because it's supposed to be a celebration of the people who've supported me, and he just wasn't one of those people. He didn't take it well. He got quiet for a minute, and then he started pleading, saying that he's changed, that he wants to make things right before it's too late. He even said that he doesn't want to die knowing that his only daughter still hates him. That hit hard, but I stood my ground. I told him that forgiveness isn't something that can be forced or rushed, and that while I don't hate him, I'm not ready to let him back into my life, especially not at my wedding. The conversation ended pretty awkwardly. He seemed disappointed, but he didn't argue with me. He just nodded, said he understood, and got up to leave. Before he walked out, he told me that if I ever changed my mind, I knew how to reach him. And that was it. After the meeting, I felt a weird mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a little bit of guilt. But mostly I felt like I had made the right decision. I know some people might say I'm being too harsh, but I can't just ignore everything that's happened over the years because he's sick now. I have to protect my own happiness, and right now that means maintaining my boundaries. So that's where things stand. My dad won't be at the wedding, and I'm okay with that. I've got an amazing support system in my mom, stepdad, Mark, and all the people who have been there for me through thick and thin. That's what matters to me. And honestly, I feel like I've gotten the closure I needed, even if it wasn't the way I expected. Thanks again for all the advice and support. It means the world to me.